Hello, welcome to my stream today at a new, earlier time. I'm giving this a try. Streaming in my office today, so I should have a better internet connection, less chance of it dropping off. Um, if you have never seen my stream before, I'm going to apologize right away. This is not a great setup I have. I'm literally streaming off my laptop, which is a M1 MacBook Air. So sorry for the lack of good production right off the bat, but if you're here, why don't you say hi in the chat? And let's get this started here in a minute. All right, there we go. Yeah, for a lot of people, this is probably the first time they got to see a stream live, because I usually stream at 8 p.m. Pacific time, which is pretty much the worst possible time to stream for everyone, unless you are in the Asian Pacific Islands. Hey, great to see people here. All right. I'm pretty excited about this one. It's been 3 weeks since I've done any streaming, so it's gonna be great to kind of catch up. It's definitely feels like it's been a while, and a lot's happened. So, and we have a guest today. We have Bret, and we're gonna talk about React and Hydrogen and React Server components. So I probably shouldn't waste too much time here dawdling at the beginning, but just giving people a chance to join on the stream here for a minute while I just meander about nothing. And for those wondering, this is just orange juice with ice. I haven't taken up day drinking. All right. So yeah, let's get started here. I think I've given people enough time. This week in JavaScript, the movie. Well, it's been a while. It's been 3 weeks, so it isn't really this week in JavaScript. This thing. I mean, it's more like this month in JavaScript. As I was joking, some people who wanted to ask me if I was going to do the segment today, and yeah, I am. So I'm gonna share my screen here for a minute, and we're gonna catch up and see what's been going on, which takes us all the way back to I want to say May 6th was the last time I did a stream. I think my last stream was all about the winners of the solid hack had just been announced. A lot of really cool stuff happened that Monday, and I really wanted to talk about it, but obviously wasn't in the cards because I needed to take the next 2 Fridays off. But this is huge news. If anyone missed it, I mean, it feels weird talking about something that happened a couple of weeks ago, but I mean, honestly, I've been waiting for this for months. Cloudflare and Dino decided to actually talk and standardize the platform APIs that they're working on, right? This is the stuff you find in all the serverless functions. And obviously, they've taken different approaches to Node as well. And right now, when you're writing these meta frameworks, it feels like you target like a billion different things. Being able to consolidate on this is huge. And part of this message, actually, I think, did I retweet it? Cloudflare is open sourcing their workers runtime, so you could run it on like other platforms potentially. I mean, this is big. What do we got here? I'm pretty sure most of you probably did not miss this at the time, but I just want to point out this is huge news, and I really wanted to cover it. But I mean, Netlify Edge isn't really part of this yet, but I know. Well, I mean, to be fair, Netlify Edge uses Dino deploy, so maybe not part of this conversations here going on, but it's all part of these same platforms. We only actually have a few of these runtimes and a few of these platforms underlying the infrastructure, right? A lot of the infrastructure runs on one of the bigger providers like an AWS or Google Cloud. Cloudflare has their own infrastructure that's really cool, but it'd be really awesome as a developer to just be able to build for the platform, so to speak, also on the server, right? So I mean that's how it started for me, basically a month back. I'm trying to do these talk about the stuff in a logical order, but I am a little bit all over the place. Also, right at the beginning of this was some more interesting feedback, about React and people having fun with React 18 strict mode, double calling everything. I think this kind of just set the atmosphere um, for what was going to come in the next couple of weeks. And it's one of those kind of things where, like, this makes a lot of sense. A lot of React has to be very conscious of the purity of the functions you're running, and they can execute things arbitrarily, and they're getting you prepared for that. But it did confuse and trip up a lot of people, and I think this is part of the kind of atmosphere that we're walking into. What that will be relevant in some of the other conversations that we're going to be talking about when we go over what's been happening the last few weeks. I just wanted to put this out here right at the beginning, just to kind of, this double execute that's been going on is definitely something, and strict mode in React 18 is definitely something that's been felt by the community. And I think there is this kind of interesting tension in the air in terms of React's future, but let's leave that for now and continue. What else was there? I mean, do I want to get into solid stuff? No, let's carry this on a bit. Yeah, obviously for me, big news was that I changed jobs. Basically, I announced on May 9th or not May 9th, but this week, that week, that I was leaving eBay at the exact same time that Taylor joined on the Marco team. So pretty stoked, honestly, to be able to get him in. I'm a little sad that we basically just cross ships. But Marco is still going well on the path to V6. But it was news for me, at least. Yeah. Oh man. We can get into this later. There's a lot of subtweeting going on, and let's not worry about that for now. So yeah, tomorrow's my last day at eBay. Okay, so what else happened? Okay, so that was basically the first week, right? Then the Google conference, like this is the beginning of conference time for everyone, and they introduced another really big thing. I mean, I've seen pieces of previews of this before, but for those of you who aren't familiar, they've been working on a page transition API. Unfortunately, it's mostly for single page apps, not for multi-page apps, but giving a way to be able to control the navigation in a single page app, at least, to be able to kind of like freeze pieces, be able to navigate smoothly forward and back, is such a missing piece. Like, we try and develop ourselves all the time when we make client-side routers. To have this built into the platform is absolutely huge. I always make such a big deal about routing, and routing will play into some more conversations coming up here. But to have this kind of piece really does make a huge difference. I mean, I saw someone who went like even as far that like essentially they're like declaring that like they wouldn't need frameworks for single page apps anymore. That basically they could just use web components, some events, and this new transition API, and just like bye front end frameworks. I don't completely agree with that take completely, but I do think it's interesting that there are the pieces around that we can do a lot of this stuff without venturing out, and this could serve as new foundations for new development. Yeah, I think Jake said that it would probably work on me. Yeah, I mean, obviously MPA side, we're really excited about this, but it's actually a challenging piece because we want to be able to do things like animations and make the experience better, but there is like tricky things. Like streaming is one of the key pieces that makes multi-page apps really performant, because you can get that shell out right away. And I've shown this before on stream, where it feels almost like client side, because you can like get that placeholder in and have the shell not even flicker, and you actually get that immediate responsiveness like you do with a single page app, and handle the loading state, and it works really well. But you also want to kind of leverage these kind of APIs and figure out like at what point do you do the page transition to have that kind of control, and that might be harder to dial. So I understand why they haven't got all the way to MPAs yet. Yeah, yeah. When MPAs actually get consideration, I think that's, in a sense, that's what some people would argue, that's the whole point of single page apps. Like what we've been trying to solve is this whole navigation thing. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I do like that people are getting excited about this stuff. Whenever, like, the platform is the tools that we all use. We don't have to opt into using all pieces of the platform, but it is really nice that we have these options to choose from, and be able to like pick the best parts and take advantage of them. So more is always good in this case. All right, not yet. Okay, where are we? Let's see. Not there. Yeah, I guess now is not a bad time to talk about some solid stuff. We released 1.4, which was pretty sweet. There's a few features, and I did talk about them on my previous stream before the release went out. So if anyone's really interested, they can look at my last stream and see all the details. But yeah, I mean, top level arrays are really nice. They just make all our examples and everything nicer. It feels so much more natural when you're going from like a signal and you've got a simple thing, and then you're like, oh, I need to do have some more performance, some nested reactivity. You just switch from you can basically switch from signal to store as a first step, and it just works, which is huge. And then obviously then you can apply all the next nested optimizations as you want. But essentially it's just a really nice way to just this was just missing, and very painful. All the resource stuff was really cool too. And I think just these niceties. Oh yeah, here I have the list of stuff, are just the kind of things that people would expect. And I'm getting a lot happier. Like these later minor releases to Solid 1 are really about just kind of smoothing out those rough edges, in preparation of more bigger changes coming in 2.0. So I think I'm pretty stoked about this, and it feels better than ever to use Solid, which is great, honestly. Like this is where these kind of attention things are coming in. Like Ken Wheeler had a really nice thread, which tipped off a bunch of conversations, and he just kept on talking and going about like every time he found features. And I think another similar bunch of threads were also from let me see if I can find them now. Duplicate. Sorry, I didn't actually pull this one out before, but search. Was it basically a whole series of like discovering Solid online. It was a lot of fun. Kind of, I probably have to go back a little bit to find these ones, but why am I not finding them right now? This is what happens when you don't prepare. I'm not touching Solid until Solid has an ecosystem. I would never make an app without something like Chakra. God damn it. He basically just was going on for a few days, just reading the docs and being like, how does this exist in a framework? I obviously enjoyed that a whole lot. I'm sorry, Solid.js, but it makes too much sense. Yeah, like this was fun to watch. It was great watching people talk about this, and a large part of this happened because, as it turned out, basically right after I went on vacation, after these conversations, we ended up with the Fireship video, which I'll bring up in a second. But this was a particularly nice quote. Dom from Inferno gave us a nice shout out about how React team might consider looking at what we're doing here. I imagine that isn't really a thing, but it is what it is. But yeah, for those of you not living under a rock, yeah, this Fireship video went up and it blew things up. I was on vacation, and I was not expecting this. I had no heads up. I woke up one morning, someone was like, Fireship made a solo video, and it was like 7 a.m. and I go and I see the notification at 7:20, and I opened up the video and it already had 20,000 views, and I was like, whoa, what's going on here? Yeah, I honestly, thank you. I don't know what else to say. But yeah, I mean, this is what triggered a whole bunch of conversations. This was a huge week for Solid in general, and it did bring up some good discussions that are working good. Pointing out, okay, yeah, some people are asking about am I full time on Solid? Let me get into that in a minute. I will talk about that when I get to it. I'm just trying to keep the timeline relatively in order here, even though there's a lot of stuff going on. But essentially, some people discovered Solid for the first time because of that Fireship video, and one of them is Sean. I think he's on the React core team now, but he's responsible for the React compiler. Very, very much confused by why this switch wasn't working with this if statement, and yeah, this one I have to admit confused me a little bit. Not the example. I understand exactly what's going on, but that why people thought this was a big deal, and I realized it's just coming to Solid is a huge mind shift. I mentioned it. Someone mentioned before about the turning the handlebars around, on a bike while riding it. It takes a bit to kind of wrap your head around. From our model and our perspective, this example makes perfect sense. Like, if something runs once, why would you expect this to ever do anything differently? But for people who are like, oh, that's a red mark, and it's like, I don't even. It's very difficult to even picture what this would do or could do in Solid's model. It just doesn't make sense. Which those kind of things I don't mind as much, because there was a conversation a while back, and I remember someone said one of the best things about React was that they're very, very clear about like what works and what doesn't work, like where the shortcomings are. And I think that's more important, because when you hit the unexpected stuff, that's when you hit problems. Anyone who's used Solid for more than like an hour or like 20 minutes, like who's done the tutorials, pretty much can probably tell you why this could never work. And that's, once you're there, this isn't even like an accidental trap. It's literally just the most like basic part of the framework. And there's a lot of good discussion in this thread about this, because I got a little bit heated, and people think it's funny. Like, this is my version of heated, where I was like, oh, come on, are you going to tell me either one of these is stranger than the other? Is it strange to expect that a JavaScript function that runs once doesn't execute multiple branches of a conditional, or that a function that reruns multiple times has stable references? Yeah, I mean, I understand. Yeah, I was really happy for whoever pointed this out in chat. I think it was probably Sunil, former React core member, and from Cloudflare, who actually did that. And yeah, it is a change. And that's the thing. It's funny, from Solid's docs and Solid's teaching, we never try and hide this fact. We never go like, we're a React clone. But that's the narrative I guess people are hoping for. But we've had React clones. Solid is not a React clone. But yeah, I mean, there is a lot of discussion here. This one was interesting from David. I just pointed this out, where he's like, I wish there's just like a simple framework that didn't do all this stuff. I don't think there's any simple. I've seen like multiple ways to do this stuff, and they all have trade-offs. I feel like you pick the best trade-offs and but this is like a brushing of imperative versus declarative against what people consider natural, which is generally imperative, and what people want, which is declarative, because it simplifies things. And I think walking those lines, we're always going to have issues unless you just give up on performance. We can come up with better abstractions, but those abstractions have some potential leaks, and we're just going to keep on shifting things around a little bit. But I don't think we fundamentally just find that, I don't know, simplification people are looking for, perhaps. I don't know. Rich Harris, luckily, see, I told you I was on vacation at this time, trying to like not respond. Rich Harris actually did me a solid. Sorry, I'm playing on the pun as well. He actually explained how Solid's compiler works. If you want to actually like come from like a third party perspective, like without getting into too many details, for someone who's just like coming in and doesn't really get it, he actually does a pretty decent job of explaining how Solid's compiler works. I am later on the thread somewhere. I thank him so much because like I was like trying to do stuff, and like I'm with my family, and I'm like trying not to respond to the craziness on Twitter. I probably shouldn't have even posted in the first place, given how much of a storm it would kick up. But actually, I'm glad I did. There was great discussion in here, right? Saying looking like React is a double-edged sword. Yeah, and I was like, definitely, but given our goals and values, it could only look different than React in the most superficial ways. That's my belief. Like we would have arrived at the same API regardless of React. So yeah, this is great. Honestly, I can dig into here forever, but we got a guest today. But I mean, this is just, yeah. I mean, if you want to get lost in conversations about abstractions and frameworks, just keep on digging into this one. All right. Okay. And yeah, Dan calmed it down. As I told you, this is me getting a little bit heated. He was like, cue the moment in which we, restraining judgment, marvel at how similar looking code can mean completely different things depending on the mindset we apply. Code is social, a language to speak, inspiring many languages that there have been, are, or will be. Yeah. Profound, Dan Abramoff style. This is why Dan is so awesome. I think the thing to understand is, which is interesting, is I think that there is a certain convergence on the language in which we describe UIs, the stuff that I call the reactive language stuff, like the idea of that there's these state signals, that there's these derived values, and that there's these side effects. We are actually arriving here a bit on kind of convergence in terms of language. But yeah, I mean, there's different mental models still present here, and like completely different ways to do things. So I think this is really interesting observation, and I think that I think we're in for some fun, especially when you consider the role of compilers and templating DSLs. Like in one sense, React and Solid are very much on this one side where we try and keep that stuff to a minimal. So it's really interesting to see two different pieces of the code with almost pure runtime semantics actually run differently. But think about how chaotic perhaps it gets when you consider that now you can start applying compiler stuff like Svelte all over, and like where that whole spectrum lies. It's very interesting to me. Like at some point, do we figure out a language of UI? Essentially, that's the question. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's funny. It's just, as I said, always love that Dan's level-headed there, because like this isn't really an issue. It actually makes sense from the way it works if you know that. So yeah, but it's good. Sometimes we have these discussions and it starts as something that's a little bit confrontational, and then it turns, I mean, this isn't even confrontational that much. I mean, maybe a little bit. I mean, this is just maybe fair feedback. He also goes like weird, and calling things foot guns. I'll leave that at where it is. That tweet didn't explode. If it had, I might have had to address that more. But I think it's cool that we can start from that and actually get into real discussion. I think that's an important thing. And I do, even if Twitter doesn't let deep discussion, it does let the culmination of lots of opinions kind of come together, whether that's good or bad. But I actually like this aspect. What do we got here? Oh, yeah. Gotta love some Astro news. They got the Vercel build up and going. But let's see here. Yeah, are we here yet? I think we might be here yet. Let me just double check, because yeah, we're here yet. Yeah, everything is, yeah, perfect. Sorry, there's just so much to go over. It's hard for me to keep organized, but here we go. Yeah, I'm starting at Netlify this week, which is huge. People keep on asking, like, are you full time on Solid? And the answer is, it kind of depends. I can be full time on Solid if that's what I want. But if you guys know anything about me, I am never satisfied with just the one thing. I need to, me being full time on Solid, so to speak, involves me exploring what everything else is doing. And we're doing today. We're gonna look at React Server components again, and I want to know about the edge, and I want to know about how Dino and Netlify are doing these things. And I think it's really interesting. I had conversations in this process before I got hired to Netlify, where I did talk to Guillermo from Vercel, and I talked to Matthias from Netlify, and had conversations with them. And I even talked to people at Cloudflare, and I got a real sense of like all the different ways that they're approaching the problem, and the similarities and the differences. And as I said, I'm really stoked on seeing the way that a bunch of them are getting together on the runtime platform. But it goes more than that when you think of at a framework level, when you talk about things from micro front ends to different caching layers, like how, everyone kind of knows that the edge has this great potential, but we know that there's latency to databases. We know that there is, so like caching is still important. It's like a new type of CDN almost. Like, I believe like Next has been experimenting with caching at a suspense level and doing analytics like on a per suspense layer level with React. And what else can we do like that? How do we best combine our immediately available static experiences with our dynamic experiences? This is a whole area of exploration. And obviously, I've been working really hard with teams because of my work on Marco, and working closely with Quick and Astro to understand stuff on the hydration side. But that's only part of this puzzle. I think it's a very important piece because ultimately everything gets to the client. But I'm very excited to have the means to do that. So for me, working at Netlify is working on Solid, but it's also continuing my relationships with these other open source projects, figuring out what they need. Like routing is something that's been talking about. I would love to kind of look at seeing what we can do on the routing side, maybe in a more universal sense, if we can get this client server hybrid router, work across the board. I'm not sure if that's in our future, but that's something I want to look at. I want to look at how we benchmark how hydration performance and SSR work. I think we need improvements there. I think everyone could benefit from better understanding what the performance profiles and trade-offs are for things like resumability. Like these things aren't free. You can imagine if you have to serialize a bunch of data now so it can resume, that probably has a different cost. You're trading CPU for bandwidth. If you have to lazily load chunks of the code, what's the right amount of code to lazily load? How does that affect our load time? Obviously, if you don't load anything, you're going to get a good page score, but is the user being impacted by that later? Like these are things we need to understand. And I feel like being at Netlify is the place where I can do that. So yes, I get to work on Solid, but there's more too. Just catching up with chat here for a second. Yeah, a bunch of celebration things. I thought we had a bidding when you get paid, Pat. For me, it's about the passion. It wasn't just about money. To be fair, there may have been options out there where I could have even been paid more, but I believe I had a lot of choices ahead of me. If that makes any sense, in terms of where I can go and what degree I could focus on Solid, on open source, and what it would mean for the project. It's tricky to navigate. One day I want to talk to Evan Yu, I think, about that, because he's managed to stay mostly independent. And this type of role keeps me relatively independent. But there's options where you can like join a company, and then it kind of envelops your community. And that can be good. Another thing, because now you can pay people to work on it, or you could start a company like Astro or Remix. And I had a lot of choices like that to consider. And I went with the one where I'm kind of betting on you guys. If you think about it, I can't pay anyone to work on Solid where I am. I'm betting on the community. I'm betting on open source. I'm I being able to work myself and at my job and be able to work on this is amazing, because I get to dedicate more time and I'm not staying up all night. But the truth of the matter is, it's different than eBay where they're paying people to work on Marco. You know what I mean? So there is certain realities and trade-offs. But as I said, I mean, maybe I'm an idiot. I'm betting on you. So let's see how that goes. Yeah, this is a fair question. We're gonna see how that relationship goes. Obviously, I'm like incredibly busy right now. Like anytime you switch a job, I was like, and I have conference talks and stuff to prep for and all that stuff. But I'm very much still in the conversation with that. We spend a lot of time designing these things, working through the problems, challenges, understanding it, figuring out how to articulate them, document them. You know, it always hurts me a little bit, because I get mentioned sometimes in articles and stuff, and my work on Solid, because Solid's really getting more popular and stuff, and people have that association. And then they'll talk about hydration and stuff, and they'll be like Ryan from Solid, and it makes sense why they do this, but Marco gets mentioned way fewer times than it should, when it's kind of like not only the pioneer of all this stuff, but still today basically leading the charge. People kind of just glaze over it. So I mean, this I'm gonna continue to do what I was doing with Marco, at least in terms of promoting it, writing, educating people, helping with design. We still have more work to do on async, queuing, scheduling. We'll see how much time I have to work on writing code and how that fits in, but I'm very much still invested in the project. I think what Marco is doing, especially with Marco 6 now, is it's the right things, the things that we should be doing. I think there are still different philosophies here and different pieces, and I actually wrote about that in an article a little while back. But I think it's actually kind of interesting, because like you do end up like it's generational, which is kind of funny, because Marco kind of maybe is so far ahead of its time that, in a sense, where you have React Angular, and then you have maybe people who are talking about Solid Svelte, it's kind of quick Marco, if you understand what I mean. I'm not saying any of these aren't going to like combine and have the same features and kind of get there, and that there won't be competition, and that these are just locked in their generation. I'm just saying, for me, it's like that sort of thing, right? So yeah, I very much want to see Marco succeed, and I'm going to do everything possible I can to help with that as well. Yeah, thank you. Sure, but lots of money too. I mean, maybe I should have just gone and worked on the Angular team at Google. I'm pretty positive that probably would have been the route where I could have cashed in the most money. But we do what we love. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to get into comparisons there. I mean, Misco did lay out most of Quick back in 2019, but Marco obviously has been doing a lot of stuff since 2013. I'm not going to get who came first, but they didn't have that piece of resumability and all. Like, let's just say that they're different philosophies slightly, but very close, and that we're just attacking. It's the two things attacking the same kind of problems. Okay, so I'm going to move forward, because we need to go on. I mean, there was so much great stuff, like Alexis adding two-way binding to Solid. My absolute favorite thing. But I have a whole stream about two-way binding, so I'm not going to talk about that. Sorry, it looked like I lost the stream there for a second. I hope you all didn't lose me there. I was just saying that quick SSR performances improvement is probably very much welcomed, and that kind of gets us mostly up to today. I only have one more topic that I want to kind of bridge over, and it's unfortunate. I was talking about how sometimes being a bit aggressive on Twitter can actually promote good discussion. Well, that discussion never happened on Twitter, but it happened off of Twitter, and I want to show everyone this. This was deleted. It was original Twitter post, and I mean, there's been a few of these where Remix team actually like write something and then they delete it later, and then everyone's like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And I'm like, "I'm not making this stuff up." This is kind of important because it's not about what this means, because obviously there is an announcement, and what had happened was where is it? Did I skip over it? No, maybe it's in my bookmarks. Yeah. They announced the Next.js nested routing layouts, RFC, and whatnot, and it talked about how they're going to handle routing, and I think it's really cool. I think this is really important, and we're probably I might kind of talk more about this again in the future. It was a big one this week, and what caught me wasn't this about not giving them credit, because Remix has had no problem, taking credit for whatever gets built on the web. That has not been a problem for them. I think this felt more like a blow, because you have basically the visionary of React for the last few years working at Next, and we've been talking about this routing on stream for months, and then they kind of just go ahead on their own kind of vision and do this stuff. And they do want to include more of the community and make that work. But it's challenging, because like you're building something like Remix where maybe you don't quite have the same inside track, and you're building all the same stuff, and then React has like their official version, and now are you at odds with React? And it's like, how many times does this happen before you feel like you're getting pushed out a bit? I feel like that's where the pain is here. It's not about what's being written here. This is about a concern about, Vercel owning React future. Not that anyone believes that's exactly what's intentionally happening, but just React. Like, let's connect some dots here for a minute. React with React 18 basically launches a whole bunch of features that you can't use unless you're using some third-party library, right? Like, they're like, don't look for us for it, use a third party. And then they start rolling these features out as part of like Next.js, which basically the visionary behind React is actually developing in their way. And Remix kind of developed a bunch of stuff themselves. They had like their own transition model. They're not using suspense. They create their own error boundaries. And suddenly then React's like, or Next is like, this is the way. This is hard after a while. It feels like kind of getting gut punched a little bit. Like, even a call out or like in the influence, you kind of feel a little bit better about what you're doing and the work you're doing. And don't get me wrong, I actually think Remix had very little to do with this addition to Next. This is all about server components. Let's not kid ourselves. Like, they've had this request for nested routing forever. I mean, React Router 1 had nested routing back in 2014. Ember had it back in 2012. Sapper in 2016. I can go back. Everyone keeps on trying to claim who created nested routing first. It's been here forever. I wrote my first nested router in 2014 for web components. Like, this is not about who came first or giving credit. This is about a future that React is building and trying to figure out how to balance, including the community and the ecosystem. That's why this is a topical subject and why this is important, right? I realize it was totally planning. At least I hope that's why he's well, sure, but I mean, this is my problem here. I mean, people have to go back to my streams and check this stuff out. There's been a lot of conversations that have gotten deleted here. I like sometimes when these lead to good conversation. This one did not. There was a lot of harsh bashing here, and I feel like it's probably right to delete this one. You know, we had our own little tiff with Michael Jackson earlier, you know, but I mean, like, it got deleted too. Like, who cares about what someone thinks about solids control flow? Like, let's just move on. But I think that I feel the pain here. Like, as an empathetic person, I feel this, and I even if it deleted, I think this was important, and I hope others can get that. And maybe this is just my outsider view. I'm not part of Remix. I haven't felt that, but that's what I see. And I'm interested about what others think about how React's developing and React server components, right? That's a bit where we get Bret on stream today, because this is an interesting thing about the future of React, right? So yeah, I mean, this is a complicated subject, and this is kind of by my whole lead-in here to actually talking about today's topic. I went a little bit over time than I wanted to, but there was just so much to go on here. Let me see here just a second. See if we do have Bret around. We do have Bret around. Yes. No, that's perfect. So we are going to get Bret on stream. I'm going to switch ourselves over, and let's welcome Bret. Hi.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Good. I've just been listening on, hearing all the hot takes, and it's been fun.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty heavy message to kind of lead into this, but I think this is why this is a topical conversation. I've wanted to talk to you about hydrogen and about React Server Components forever. I did my own little dig in on stream back in January into just React Server Components and that demo, like a year late, but better late than never. But I think it's really interesting because there are a lot of perceptions from the outside trying to just figure out, are we getting word in React's future? Like, I think there's a comment about, should React be a foundation? And, luckily, Shopify saw the potential server components almost immediately, and we're like, this is what we want. And I'd love to just know a little bit more about that. And, we just, how's it been? Like, how are you doing?
Good. Yeah. So I'm an engineer at Shopify. I work on the hydrogen team. I'm based out on the East Coast. So thank you for, this time instead of your usual time. But yeah, there's a long history, I think, at Shopify that's kind of led up to, the adoption of server components, the framework that we're building. I think it's a big thing, honestly, for a company like Shopify to say, hey, we're going to build our own framework instead of given what else is out there in the ecosystem. There's Next, there's a lot of things out there. So the decision to build a framework, it's a big decision. I think it's yet to play out for Shopify. Is that a good decision or a bad decision? I mean, I'm on the team, so I'm excited about it. I'm really excited about what we're working on, but you can't predict the future. So we'll see what we can to make it, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting because it feels like this is a realm that where someone was mentioning a lot of innovations happening now on the meta framework side. I actually think that a lot of innovations also happening on the framework side, as you know, but I can understand where a lot of that perspective is coming from. But on the other hand, are we seeing consolidation as well? Like, when Svelte makes Svelte kit, like, when it's actually the core members working on that, and some people might, obviously I've been working on Solid Start, but some people might also perceive Next being that extension for React. What does that mean for everyone else? It feels like there should be more room, and React team does seem like they're trying to approach this in a very general way and getting feedback. But again, what do I know?
I feel like they are. I feel like, that's kind of even been the mentality of, that's one of the criticisms of React. There isn't necessarily a router in core. There isn't some sanctioned state management library. That is a complaint that a lot of people come to React compared to Svelte and other frameworks where batteries included. There's a way to do styles. There's a way to do routing. There's a way to do lots of things out of the box. Whereas React, they're kind of unopinionated with a lot of it. And so I think, that's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. I have to say, I like that part about React. That's like one of the pieces I wanted to emulate when I created Solid was that element of it. But yeah, it is interesting because I think there's a feeling right now, because especially the way the language has changed and stuff, that this is an interesting choice, right? They want to keep it open, but at the same time, it's hard to now. So there's like it feels like a lot of the features are layering on top of each other in a way that's actually almost like, here's the building blocks for Meta Framework. You can build it however you want, except we're going to kind of guide you to how we think you should do it. And it's an interesting challenge because that isn't targeting the average developer anymore. It's targeting people like yourself working on the framework. So that's where the tools and kind of come in. And I think that's it's interesting. Obviously, I'd have to get down on stream or someone there and actually get right into their reasoning. But it is obviously yourself and a few others being on the other side of it. Obviously interesting to see, kind of understand how that feels for you. But I'm glad so far that seems like that's what it feels like, at least.
I mean, we aren't without our own complaints. So we work pretty closely with Meta on React, and especially when it comes to server components, we're a very, very early adopter. And there's pains with being an early adopter. I mean, we encounter bugs, we report bugs, we fixed bugs, we're very actively involved. But at the same time, Meta's been fairly open that server components for them, I think, is still a little bit more experimental. And it's not as big of a priority to move it out of experimental as it might be for us, and also for Vercel. Vercel's definitely pushing more to move it out of experimental, just as we are. Whereas Meta, maybe not as much. I don't know. I can't speak for them necessarily, but it doesn't seem, at least, as priority.
It makes sense to me because, I mean, I'm sure there's developer experience pieces and there's parts of their app where they're going to run their stuff internally their own way anyways. But Shopify, as you mentioned, has a history and a reason why this was attractive. And as I said, right away, like you guys, like before I even Next probably knew that they were going to do some of the stuff. Shopify was just like, we're using server components, like straight up. You clearly saw a benefit, like right from the beginning.
So the benefits we're really going for is, I think in the last few years, I think a lot of people got really excited about Jamstack. This idea of, I can serve out stuff really quickly if it's static. If I pre-generate a ton of content, I can put it on the edge. I can put it really wherever I want, and it can be super duper fast. But honestly, for us at Shopify, static content is not interesting. Like when we talk about like an interesting storefront or an e-commerce site, we're talking about something that is extremely dynamic. So if you compare going to maybe Walmart.com or going to an Amazon e-commerce website, you go to a product page that shows a product that you're going to buy. There's actually a ton of content that's on that page that is very, very, very dynamic.
Yep.
Like if you think about, like, say maybe it's Walmart, there's maybe in-store pickup. In-store pickup, whether it says it's available, depends upon your location, depends upon the stock in the store. Like there's so many different variables of things on any given product page that are unique to you, your location, product, like what your interests are, related products, all sorts of things. And for us as Shopify to compete, to provide the best e-commerce experience for our customers, we have to like provide a framework that from the get-go can be super duper duper dynamic, not static, but also super duper performant. And so server components are interesting from our perspective because you can do very dynamic things on the server, never ship that stuff to the client at all. And where that server logic is living, also, if that can exist on the edge and close to the user, it can be performant. And so if you go back a year, maybe when Shopify, maybe over a year and a half ago, probably when we were first researching, should we build this new framework Hydrogen, or should we use something off the shelf? Like, again, the initial sort of thing we're looking for is we want something very, very dynamic. And Next.js, at least at the time, I think Next.js has some good primitives for building more dynamic sites, but it feels like when you use the framework primarily, like at least the first generation Next.js is more static focused, or more SSG sort of Jamstack focused. This new approach, especially with what they're doing now, this recent announcement, is very different. Also, Remix wasn't around a year and a half ago when we were first researching this. So, you put us in the whole situation like a year and a half later and say, okay, we need this dynamic framework. I don't know if we would invest in the same or not. Whether we would have picked Remix or Next or something else, I don't know. But just given the time and the place, with the expertise we have here with React devs, we decided to invest heavily in server components and building out Hydrogen. And that's kind of the reasoning behind it. Like, again, we haven't reached a 1.0 release with Hydrogen, and so it's not really, it's still dev preview. I wouldn't necessarily build an e-commerce site yet in production with it and ship it. As Ryan, just yesterday, you discovered a bug that we fixed, but there's still bugs in the framework.
I was kind of pushing in that way, because one thing that you mentioned the dynamicism, but you also, because when I think of React, I think of dynamic anyway. Like, React in itself is very dynamic, and maybe some of the frameworks were catering to SSG, but it's React, so you could use it to be fairly dynamic if you wanted to kind of force it a little bit. But I like, performance is what I was kind of more hinting at, but I mean, I don't know how much that plays into, because like e-commerce has those kind of performance considerations, definitely. And I worked, as you know, I worked at eBay, and eBay was interesting too, because obviously there's all those little pieces, and we're also an auction site, so we have that dynamicism and actually keeping the bidding and the like the status of stuff, up to date. And it is interesting. People sometimes, I do talk to a lot of people at e-commerce, and they a lot of them are assume, oh, it's mostly static, and it depends. It's, this is why there's been a lot of talk about islands and other technologies, but like for React itself, things weren't actually branching out in that direction. And I think RSCs, or maybe React server components, or maybe just hey, we can live in this world as well. And I think that's interesting, because it opens up potential. You mentioned people had experience with Shopify with React, and it's, everybody has experience with React. It's kind of industry standard. So having this option of something that could potentially cater to e-commerce seems like a no-brainer. I mean, there's this promise here that with server components, I believe that you can cut down on shipping huge amounts of JavaScript and focus just on the parts that need to be in the browser. I think that feels like stuff that would be very important for an e-commerce site, because that performance is important.
Yeah, and I don't know, it's the same paradigm too. So these components that you're building on the server that only ever execute on the server, that don't ever ship code to the client, it's still React components. There's restrictions around them, but at least it's the same paradigm,
right?
In most ways.
Right, because that's the thing. There's been some question about that. There's a DX kind of consideration here, developer experience, because there are ways to get performance and get some amount of dynamicism, but they usually involve you maintaining like two apps historically, like you being like, here's my fast backend, and then here's my intercepted JavaScript layers. And there's been a bunch of companies that have played around with those kind of things, and been like, oh, we can't actually run a full React app in the browser, it's too expensive. I think Netlify had something where they showed that, where they were actually using React just on the server and then doing their own custom thing in the front. Amazon had their own kind of, Netflix, not Netlify, too. Netflix had something like that where they were using React just on the server and not in the client. And then there's Amazon a while ago posted a big thing where they're saying on Amazon.com they couldn't actually, for their performance budgets, and the way they're architected, they couldn't actually use React at all. And this is, I think, very much coming from pre-React Server Component world. I don't even know if React Server Components completely for everyone can fill that gap, but it is interesting that it does seem to open up a new potential opportunity that might have not been there before.
Yeah.
Okay. But
a question just to answer a question that somebody posted regarding in production. So we don't have we're working with a number of partners kind of just to kind of preview Hydrogen. We don't have anything to announce at the moment of anybody using it in production, but we hope to have a 1.0 release within the near future. We're just working with a number of people to validate the API, but also just make sure we're actually ready for final production use. There's a number of things we want to make sure it's hardened and resilient and really ready to go.
Cool. Yeah, no, I did get a chance to play with it a little bit, and as you mentioned, found a little bug, but I could already see the incredible potential here. Maybe it wouldn't be a bad time now to actually kind of see Hydrogen and see what it's all about.
Sure.
Do you have the demo, or should I? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I can share. So if you want to get started with Hydrogen, you go to hydrogen.shopify.dev. Kind of a fun little website that kind of helps you get started. But really, like, getting started is pretty simple. Just npx create Hydrogen app latest. If I run that, let's just create a Hydrogen app real quick. Here we are. Start up Visual Studio Code right here and just kind of show you what it looks like. Let's install the dependencies here before we get going. And while that's installing, I can just kind of show you a little bit around what it looks like.
Yeah, always fun to readjust all the sizes for streaming because you end up blowing up all your stuff and then all the windows just don't look as nice. And then you're like, how do I get around? But people who are trying to watch this from their mobile phones will thank you.
That's right. So here we are. Let's actually, before I show around the code, let's just start it up. It's just yarn dev to start it up, and should fire up. So let's go to localhost. Here we are. Here is this. So this is just the sample application that we distribute with Hydrogen just out of the box. Like this is not like, clearly this is meant to be something that is very customizable. You can change it to whatever you want. But if you already have, and maybe this is something we didn't mention at the start, Ryan, but like Hydrogen isn't necessarily, we're not trying to compete with Next. We're not really trying to compete with Remix. We're not trying to compete necessarily with these other frameworks. We don't believe in the zero-sum game as far as the winners and the losers. Really, this is an opinionated framework around commerce. So if you're not doing e-commerce, even if you're not building a Shopify website itself, I don't know if I would recommend using Hydrogen. Like, Hydrogen is really tailored for the Shopify use cases, building on top of Shopify's APIs. So in that case, like, there's a config file inside here, and there is a storefront token, storefront domain. So this is just the preview site that we're using right here. If you have a Shopify storefront and you are to rotate out the storefront token and domain for your own site, then when you'd load this, instead of seeing these awesome snowboards and such, you'd see the products that you have defined inside your Shopify storefront. That's kind of an initial thing, just to realize, again, we don't believe necessarily in the zero-sum game of one framework, one winner, one loser sort of thing, or many losers. we're working actually actively with the Remix folks to build a Remix stack that is using Hydrogen React components that works really well with Remix. We also want to work really closely with Next as well. Like, this is not, like, really at the end of the day for us at Shopify, we want you to succeed as a software engineer in building a storefront quickly and easily on top of our API, so you can ship something awesome for your customers. If that means using Remix because you know Remix really well and you're excited about Remix, like, why should we like discourage that? Or if you know Vue or Svelte or whatever it may be, like, we want to actively encourage the community to build awesome stuff on top of Shopify's ecosystem.
Nice. Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, ultimately, you're here to make stores and sell things, so it's not a
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's in our business interest to be as open as possible and not be like, use Hydrogen or like, I don't know, like, it'd be silly. If we kind of look at the nuts and bolts of what a Hydrogen app looks like, though, so this is the main app.server JSX. So this is the main entry point of the application. So inside here, a lot of this stuff maybe is familiar if you know React pretty well. Maybe it wouldn't be if you don't know React. So kind of some of the key things inside here is there's suspense boundaries. Suspense is the new feature that's been added in React 18. And essentially what suspense allows you to do is the components inside here, they could dynamically fetch data at runtime. And when that happens, they will fall back, and inside this suspense boundary, this whatever is in this fallback prop is going to get rendered while data is being fetched somewhere inside this hierarchy of components. And kind of, so that's React 18 with suspense and streaming, where this whole page will get streamed to the browser. And initially, what's going to get, or go ahead.
You guys use the streaming APIs by default? Is that how that works? Okay.
Which is like something sometimes that people get confused a little bit about, because streaming's kind of, it's a little bit different. And like, so one of the biggest questions we get when it comes to streaming is what about bots? What about search engines and such? If you're streaming, how can a search engine deal with a streamed response from the server? And the answer is we'll actually not stream for bots. Instead, we will buffer the response for this entire app for a bot and send down a complete server-side rendered page. So yeah, so there's some things in here though. So that's the first sort of thing, the suspense boundary. So this helps us stream. There's other things inside here. So the Shopify provider, this is just a provider component that allows us to get Shopify specific stuff, like works with our API. And then there's the cart provider. So this is more setting up a cart context, because at the top of the page here, we have a cart. So if I come and add something to the cart, it's a global context that's available for the cart. And so a lot of these as well, these are helper components so that you can use hooks and components within them that make things a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And then we have a router. So right now our router is a custom built router. Chances are we might adopt React Router or Remix Router as their new version is called. But at this moment in time, we're using our own custom router. And there's a number of reasons for that. Primarily, so again, we're using server components, and let's talk about server components here in a second. But the current version of React Router is not compatible with server components. So we're working with the Remix folks and talking to people and just seeing if we can make a change and actually get this more standard with React Router. But the API is somewhat similar as to what you might expect. So kind of a key difference here, though, is similar to Remix, we have file routes. So this is the default sort of file routes that are going to be in the application. And then you can have custom routes inside here too. And the only custom route is just a wildcard that if nothing's matched in the file routes, we're just going to fall back to a not found.
Makes sense.
But by default, everything is going to be, all the file routes are defined inside this routes directory. We could pass in a prop inside here to customize that and put it into a different directory if you wanted. But by default, all the files all the files in this directory represent a route.
And I'm noticing right off the bat, although this might not be required, is that the entry of the app is a server component, and every route that I'm looking at right now is a server component. It looks like they're all dot server.
Right now, every route has to be a server component. There are no client component-based routes at the moment. That is something that is different with Next.js with their recent announcement. It sounds like you can have client and server components as routes. Let's talk a little bit about really what is a server component, though, and what's different about a client component versus a server component. So in a server component, you can do more things that maybe you wouldn't be able to do in a normal component, but then there's other things that you can't do. So you have restrictions, but also you have new capabilities. So some of the new capabilities that you might have inside a server component is this is only ever going to execute on the server. So everything inside this component, again, is only ever going to execute on the server. So you could do stuff like read from the file system.
Right. No, what's interesting to me about this, and I mean, because a lot of people who follow the stream, we dig pretty deep into this kind of stuff. One thing that we know as a rule of server components is you can't use state, because statefulness is a client-side concept. But it's interesting for me because I'm looking at this use session in front of me right now, and this means that use session doesn't use state underneath, but you're using a hook like naming convention, and I was wondering, is this like how did that kind of play into things? Because I imagine there's probably situations where things could be server, like APIs could be used on the server or server and client or all that. Like, is this like a way of uniforming the interface or whatever? It is interesting to me because I know that use session can't have use state in it, but like, is that a distinction?
That's a good question. So we have a linter that runs by default inside this. So if I use if I do use state inside here, I should get a warning. Yes, do not use state and React server components.
Right, but you get what I'm getting at, because technically the whole beauty of hooks is that they're composable. So like I know that use state is not even used inside use session somewhere else. Like technically deeply nested is what's interesting to me. So like when someone presents an API, it's probably like, how do you, like, is there, I'm wondering, it's an interesting thing. Like, do you differentiate between like this can only be used on the server or this can be used on the client, or like it can be used on both? And it was just kind of an interesting thing, because when I saw use session immediately, I was like, oh, that's a hook. And then I'm like, wait, that's not a hook.
Yeah, that's a good question. And honestly, I whether or not this should be named use session or something else is interesting. The thing is, though, there are I'm having a
there are things used on both sides, right?
There are hooks that can be used inside server components in React land itself.
Really? Okay.
So, yeah, for example, use context. So like there are hooks that are available. The stateful hooks are not. So like when I say stateful hooks, but also the hooks that like use effect. And so like, and I think kind of the point is, when you're thinking about a server component, it doesn't have the same life cycle as something that's on the client. A client potentially could live for a long time. It can rerun, kind of like what you were talking about earlier, like it can rerun multiple times. In a server component context, like really you're just trying to build a response to send down to the browser.
Yeah.
So state doesn't really make sense. An effect doesn't really make sense. No. Those sorts of things, like where you I don't know how I'm not saying this right, like where you're actually going to be using state and effects in a way that like is going to long last on an actual site. Like you're not, it's
Yeah, nothing updates, right? Like the only amount of updating that we care about here is that when asynchronous data resolves, that we can render something. There's no interactivity here or interaction here. So other than things that are driven that we know initially, like the URL, so to speak, or the request, and stuff that happens due to async data, which is derived from, again, the request in a sense, nothing else is you can interact with. So there's no need for any statefulness because nothing can possibly change.
Yeah, it's request response. It's just the request and we're delivering the response.
Someone's asking about context, but I think the whole thing is context here works in a simpler mechanism in that it's just a way of injecting data or variables. Like if you're going to write an app that has some shared data, higher up, then essentially I'm gathering this is just a way of getting that into your components, right? Instead of prop drilling. Like context is just the container, not necessarily the stateful mechanism.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And there's lots of tricky things that come with context that we won't go into, but like that's in a nutshell kind of the way it works. But this is one of the probably the downsides of server components is like what you're getting at is it can be a little bit confusing what you can and can't do inside a server component. Like inside a server component, I'm not going to be using stateful and like APIs that might have like effects and such inside them, but I can directly query a database if I wanted to.
Yeah.
I can read from a file system if I wanted to. I can do all sorts of privileged stuff. And for commerce, that becomes interesting too, because say we have an API token that's a privileged API token. We don't want that to show up in the browser. We don't want that ever to be delivered down to the client. We can put that in a server component easy. And because the server component is only ever going to execute on the server, it doesn't matter what tokens and what sorts of things are put inside there.
Yeah, and it's interesting because right now I know there's some conversation on the React side, like how they denote server components, whether you use the file extension or whether other things. I think in that sense, this file extension is like, here is the contract. Like you don't go and accidentally retype the file name usually. Like it would be terrible if someone accidentally let a server component get to the client by doing something. React, the way this is set up with using the file system naming convention and the fact that the server components have this like you can't be nested under client component stuff, probably actually safeguards things a little bit too, because like that tree needs to stay intact on the server. Like if someone does try and or someone does accidentally mess something up, you'll probably get caught actually in a sense, because you'll probably be breaking one of the rules through the hierarchy. I'm getting a little more technical. Seeing it described this way is getting me thinking. So I'm just thinking out loud.
And I should also like maybe put a caveat when I say using context inside server components. There are you can't use context the same way inside server components as you can normally inside a client component. And there's specifically at the moment, Hydrogen as well doesn't support it at the moment in a way that you can see. There is it's recently been added to React, the experimental version of React, like a server context concept. But my point is, though, is still largely the same, though. There are hooks that can execute on server components and some that can't. Yep. That said, though, at the same time, that what we've found heavily is there's a lot of confusion around client components. If I were to poll all the people in here and ask, do client components execute on the server? Most people probably would say no, they don't. Because inherently it's a client component. Why would a client component execute on the server? But in actuality, it does. Yeah. Because a client component, all a client component is a traditional React component. And a traditional React component in an e-commerce website, you're probably going to want to server render that.
Yeah.
Because you actually want that to be delivered to the client in a more optimized quickly rendered way. And so, yes, client components are going to be rendered on the server as well, though they still have restrictions as to what you should be doing inside those client components.
Which actually brings up an interesting question on a more technical side for me, because the original React demo didn't have this. These, like the original React
SSR aspect.
Yeah, they had they did the server components all on the client. You are SSRing the server components then with Hydrogen?
Or we are SSRing the client components. So the server components render on the server and never on the client.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
The client components render in the client, but then also we are server-side rendering them as well. If you don't want to render like something inside a client component on the server, it's the same sort of way we've done that for years with React.
So effect and trigger state and but to be clear, then, like at the point of that initial request, we are. I know we're not calling it SSR, but we are rendering the server components and interleaving the client components all on the server. Because as I said, the original React demo, they hadn't done that. They literally loaded a client-side app and then loaded the server components from the client-side app, rather than actually have everything pre-rendered. So with Hydrogen, we have the full pre-rendering happening. Okay.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where we're kind of a little bit ahead as far as what Meta has actually demonstrated and actually like put out as examples. Like they have no example that I've seen where they're actually server-side rendering client components. And that kind of like, some people jumped on their demo, like, I don't know, 6 months ago and were saying that, the performance of this sucks. And just kind of negatively bashing React server components from a perf perspective, when in reality, it was never complete. They were like, for performance, you're going to want to server-side render those client components, and they just never built it out. And I think they put a caveat now at the top of their demo saying, this hasn't been complete. We don't server-side render this stuff yet. Yeah. And, but we're trying to push this forward a lot faster, and so we're making it happen.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I believe Shopify, even more than Next, is probably incentivized on this. Like, because like Next can kind of get away with what they're doing, and they've been doing it. You guys have a real need, and as I said, I empathize with the e-commerce need. Marco was built because of the e-commerce need. Quick was built because of the e-commerce need. Like this in performance, this kind of partial hydration, these are real things that are important. And React server components for the first time give React a real ability to be part of this. And you're like, you can't get them soon enough. Like this, you get to what, make your cake and eat it too. You get to actually still use React and still get the benefits of this nature. So yeah, no, I can understand why they were first introduced in 2020 to the public. I don't know if Shopify might have known about them before, December 2020. And now we're May 2022. So, we don't know when server components are going to get public release, but I'm sure Shopify is getting closer and closer to wanting to be like, here we are, here's the future,
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that you said I feel like e-commerce in a lot of ways has pushed the web forward a lot throughout the history of the web. And a lot of people, at least I talk to, sometimes think that like e-commerce sites are relatively simple. And maybe this example probably is pretty simple in actuality. I mean, this is just a simple, pretty dumb product page, a few variations of the product, you add it to a cart and you can check out. There's not that much here. But like when you actually look at an eBay page or a Walmart page or an Amazon page, there is a ton of stuff going on. And it's actually pretty difficult and complicated to build it in a performant way.
Especially when you have to reconcile with the reality that more than one team is working on that page. That's a whole other angle of it, but I know this firsthand, right? It's just it's a whole other amount of complexity, because there's the stuff that you need from the raw performance angle, and then there's the stuff you need because Conway's law, right? So like
team scale.
Yeah. So
yeah, I had a friend once say essentially, feature and team scale is way more difficult than data scale, and most people are going to deal with the feature and the team scale a lot sooner than they're going to deal with data scale.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I found that to be true in my career 100%.
yeah, that's
So
cool.
let me show a few more things going on here.
Yeah,
So like we said, every route is a server component. So when you transition between pages, so we're on this snowboard page right here, the hydrogen snowboard. If
yeah,
we go to a collection at the top of the page, like the freestyle collection,
yeah,
now we're rendering a new route. But like I said, each route is a server component. And that means as well, and I just want to be really clear about this to everyone here, we can't transition between these pages purely on the client. Like we can't render this whole page on the client if it's a server component. We actually have to call out to the server to say, server, re-render these client components, or I mean these server components, so that we can render this new page.
but I mean, I know because I've looked into hydrogen that felt lightning fast, even though it went and did the full thing. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that you guys are prefetching on hover, I'm pretty sure, on the links. And the second thing is that server components, which are pretty cool in that they when we switch the page, React sends back some data, and we'll look at this in a minute again. And it actually diffs it, and this client morphs the old page into the new page, which is actually pretty cool. So like between the prefetching and all that, yeah, I'm definitely going to be looking. Yeah, we get this really cool JSON format, and then the hover the link, prefetch, and then click it and morph, and you're right there. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, RSC. So there's this endpoint. I love looking actually at when you click on this. If you go at the payload, actually, even just to start there, it's kind of like a router, right? But it doesn't have to be tied directly to the URL. But essentially, the input, like what you send, is essentially some kind of advanced router. You're like, I guess this is what your router is doing. It's passing basically a URL and a search parameter. It's like its own router format. And then sorry, continue.
Yeah. So that's kind of what's happening here. Exactly what you said. You've got the as we navigate over this, we hover over it. We're sending this request to the server with path name and search that's inside here. This is just kind of the default stuff. This route __ RSC is this privileged route, like for hydrogen app, or like a built-in route, I should say. And that's where we're going to rerun the server components with some data. Like this is the data we do for routing, but you can actually define your own sort of data that you might want to send up and re-render the server components. And we call them server props. So if you want to like rerun the server component and pass in new data, that data is going to be passed into your server component as a prop. And it really just gets serialized up through here. And so now when I click on this, let's look at the response.
Yeah.
So this is the response. So this is kind of a lot of this is the meat of what the actual RFC is for server components. Is like, what is the spec that defines essentially all of this data that comes back from the server, because the server essentially re-renders the server components, and then it sends this weird sort of markup back to the browser. And this is how React in the browser is going to reconcile and essentially re-render the page with the results of what the server has said.
Yeah, what's really cool about this is the server tree is actually one whole connected tree here, from my understanding. So when you go to the new route, it's like almost like re-rendering a whole page with client holes. I guess what's interesting about this, and maybe you could actually answer one of my questions, is because we hadn't seen the client rendering on the server because of obviously the old demos didn't do this. When we do an initial page load now, and we render the server components and server render the client components, get my terminology right, and then we show that, and then basically the server components don't need to do anything at that point. The client components hydrate, and your page is set up. Now you navigate to the next page. You get a new bunch of server components, but the client components don't render on the server, presumably at this point.
No.
So I'm gathering at the same time that you make this request, you parallel request for the code split JavaScript for the client components that will be on that page. And then the server components run. And then when it hits the holes in the server components where the client components are, it somehow initializes those client components with that JavaScript that we loaded in parallel. And this all gets handled by suspense, so we don't have to worry about any of the details there in terms of what the end user sees. Because if any piece of that isn't ready yet, we'll just show the fallback. And then once everything is in place, it'll just show up.
Yep, that's largely what's happening. So like you can kind of even tell with the format that's inside here, the M.
Yeah.
The M stand for modules. So these are actually like JavaScript module references.
Right.
And M1, M2, M3, M5, M6. The J, this is like, this is a tree of components that have rendered on the server, and this is the output from them. Right. Deep inside these, if we go through here somewhere, let's search for, I don't know, M2. That's it. Nope, that's like a... Anyway, the point is inside here is going to be references in the tree inside here is going to reference these modules.
Right.
And so the point is essentially like that's the tree. Here are the modules that are dependent upon. And if I clear out the filter here or re-render the page, you'll actually see that those JavaScript modules are downloaded at runtime because now they're necessary. The client, when I say those are modules, those are client modules, client components that need to be loaded for the page the new page to render.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, I'm very interested in this mechanism personally because I've wanted to kind of reverse engineer it and see what's going on. Like I've done a lot of MPA work with islands, like stuff like Astro or Marco does, but this is like a slight. There's tons of similarities, but it is slightly different. Like the funny thing is the rules between the server and client components are identical in the MPA frameworks. Like the actual like stateful and the whole understanding of state is actually almost the same. But because the outside never updates, it's different. Where in the React server components, the outside of the islands, like the server components, can actually update without doing a full page reload. So that's like the key difference here. But it's cool to see the data difference.
Well, and it gets tricky too. So like there's one thing, and so Next.js has this in their new RFC proposal, but at the moment, kind of like what you said, when you do any transition inside the page, inside the app, it's a full rerun of all the server components.
Yeah.
But ideally, like what Next.js has proposed, and we have some similar work that we have yet to announce, but ideally you could trigger subtrees to render on the server. Subtrees of components. So, I mean, that clearly makes sense with nested routing. But even outside of nested routing, if you could just say essentially like, I don't want to render everything on the server components. If I just want to re-render a specific nested tree inside the bigger tree of components, that has a lot of value. And part of the reason that has value is because usually server components are fetching data or they're doing asynchronous stuff. So if you're rerunning everything constantly, you have to heavily rely on caching and such to keep it performant, because like all of your server components are probably going to be fetching data and doing asynchronous stuff, which is going to be slow on transitions. So then you have to rely upon caching to make that work successfully.
Right. Yeah. No. That all makes sense, which is why this is actually a very complicated problem, and it's not like the routing one, especially. I actually looking at that RFC was a lot of fun because this is something I've been actually kind of struggling with. This is because if you think of nested routing, the thing is, yes, you swap out nested sections, but there's always the thing outside of the nested section that updates. And when you have a client app, you're just like, whatever, I just update the state. It's actually a much more interesting thing if you have like, you're swapping out server sections, and then it's like, but how do I change the nav so that it knows that the different thing has changed? And I guess that's the whole idea with this layout component thing. They're actually, they're even though they can all be server, I think this is a way of standardizing a pattern where you're like wrapping, even though it's the tree is kind of using child projections to pass it down, it's giving you an opportunity at each layer to have a child wrapper to handle the kind of like navigation type stuff while swapping out the actual majority of the page content. So this kind of get this kind of onion feel where you can have your tab bar be a client component that swaps out a server rendered page that so you can actually have, it's interesting. I want to see where that goes because it's at a very different granularity than like what we're talking about with Quicker Marco, where we're doing everything at a fine grain level. But we are trying to solve these same problems. So it is interesting to actually see that.
And the granularity gets tricky. I'll give you one example of where it gets tricky is in context. If you define a server context for your server components, and now you're going to re-render a portion of the subtree of your server components, you probably want to make sure that you're using the same context that it first rendered in. Otherwise, you might get some non-deterministic sort of like oddities in the output rendering. So that's a whole portion of the RFC with React when it comes to server context, is like serializing the context to the client so that subsequently when the client makes these server component requests at runtime, that it can send back up the same context so that you can guarantee that it's rendered the same way when you're doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't even think about that, but a perfect example of this is like when you have like a user page and then you have like, you're showing like a specific thing. Like I always use Twitter as an example, but you have like the user page and then the nested section is their feeds. And it's an interesting game you got to play. Like, what if navigating to your mentions actually has impact on, like, I don't know why that would, but like, what if something there actually impacts something that you're not actually reloading that's above it in the server rendered tree, and you like suddenly don't have that part of the user that you need or something? Like,
it's like a common, it's even just the pure front end world where you're not even thinking about server components. Like, it's where you put your state. Like if you know, like where you put it in the tree is going to affect what re-renders and such. And like, it just makes it all the more tricky once you have this boundary of server components and client components. It makes it tricky.
I want to catch up for some quick questions that came from the chat and see if we can knock them out really quick. Dumb question about transitions. Were concurrent features going to help there? This is going back actually quite far. I think all Bret meant was that you are going to the server when you're switching pages. Suspense and transitions still can help with the end user effect to make it look smooth, but there's no way you go from page 1 to page 2 without going to the server. Am I correct?
That's all I was trying to say is like, a lot of like a traditional React application or single page app, you might server side render it, but then once you're in the client, like once it's server side rendered, you never necessarily need to go back to the server except to request data by APIs. Like that's the only reason to go back to the server. Like you're never going to go back to the server to render something because you're rendering entirely in the browser. With server components, the paradigm has shifted where you might need to go back to the server just to render anything at all if the new page is purely server components. Like you can't do anything on the client. You have to completely go back to the server. And so this is a trade-off. Like, and some people have like, I think you can easily knock server components in the sense that like, you might say, well, you might have a quick initial load but now all of your subsequent page transitions are slower because you always have to go back to the server, because it's like almost like a multi-page app at that point in time.
Yeah, I mean,
but again, it's a trade-off. Like, so like it depends on how they're like it's easy to oversimplify that. Like you want it fast initial page load, but then you also want fast transitions. And so like you can deal with solving those in a variety of ways. And server components is one lever that you can pull to help. But you can also do things really bad with server components and have really crappy transitions where things are really slow. So,
but that's true of anything. Like most of the time, you're going to be hitting an API call when you go there anyway. Like maybe not always, and maybe client caches are thing. I think this is actually an interesting thing on the model, which I wasn't sure we would actually get there. And where this does feel more MPA like caching is a very important part of the story, but it's not quite like the client cache you might be used to in React query, so to speak. Like we're talking almost like closer to the browser's cache, like page level caching almost. Like it's a slightly different thing. I think it actually simplifies things ultimately, but maybe it might feel like you're giving up some control. And maybe that's why there's a lot of research into how to give that back or what that consideration is, because like in a typical like React query kind of model, you're worried about keys and invalidating those keys and stuff. And where, server components, you're kind of like, I'm navigating to a page. Is it cached or not? Like I think it's kind of like a slightly different mentality.
And I think it's a good change in the sense you're not thinking about like a proprietary libraries way of doing caching, like with keys and such. Really, the way you cache in Hydrogen is just standard browser sort of stuff. So this is the RSC response for rerunning the server components on a page transition. The page that you're transitioning to, you can set whatever cache headers you want on those. And those are going to apply if you just hard hit the page with a refresh, but they're also going to apply to this RSC response itself.
Right. Talking about the RSC, someone mentioned it seems to be a single route that handles all this server components. I guess is that a choice, or is that just a good design, or is like how does it?
Yeah, that's a choice. That's something that I don't know whether it's a good design or not. You can make fun of us and say we're idiots, I guess, but like that, it's just a route that's underneath the hood that expects, some state that comes up with that route that it's going to rerender the server components with.
Right.
And it's a GET request, and it has again all the cache headers and things that you would normally expect on it.
I got one more question here, and I don't know. I think the answer to this question about subtree is like we're still figuring this out. This is getting us back to where we were. We were talking about server components to render based on what page you're going to, and like how to do the subtree nesting thing. I think that's just a lot of work. You have this URL essentially to tell the server what to do. So as long as you have a way of indicating from the client what you want, what you passed in that request, presumably there's some way that you can get the right server components to render. Right.
Yeah. So like right now, there's no. Right now, the framework has no way to specifically say I want a subtree to render, but not the rest of the tree. Whenever you navigate, the whole tree is going to re-render, including the header. So, and then that's potentially not ideal. Honestly, is like this header stays the same on transitions from page to page, but it will be re-rendered in the server component response right now.
Yeah.
That's not ideal. You can't just say, I want the content below it to re-render. But even outside of like navigation and such with routing, we do give you a mechanism. And let me pull up the API so you can see what it looks like. Should have had this up probably. There is a hook called use server props. This is available only inside client components.
All right.
It's essentially what you're trying to do inside a client component is based upon some action the user takes, and that's why this should only be in a client component, because it's responded to an action or something that's like an event, something has happened. which is not going to happen inside a server component. It's going to be in a client component that you're going to have events like on clicks, things like that. But the point is you might want to set the server props a key and a value to be something else. And when you do that, essentially you are saying re-render the server components for this current route that I'm on, but pass it up some new data, a key and a value. And then that data will be part of a prop that's passed to the root route of the page that you're on.
It's funny that this is also kind of like a navigate. Essentially, it's like a
well, kind of, because it doesn't persist across navigation. So if you refresh the page,
right,
this actually isn't represented in the URL, so it will be lost.
Oh, interesting. I mean, that's giving me interesting flashbacks to the difference between URL state and view state in .NET when I was a programmer in the mid 2000s. But there are parallels here where that was a very server client hybrid model, and we're kind of going back here again where there's this game of what you serialize, what you can execute and access from both sides, and what you can do there. Okay,
and you could like really abuse this, and essentially do it for things that should be represented in the URL. Like say you did this with, I don't know, you have a product page and you can select a variant of the product. Yeah. And this is like the key and the value that you're representing to change the variant. That might seem like a good way to do it, but now you pick a red snowboard instead of a blue snowboard, and you try to share that with your I don't know, your significant other, and it's not represented in the URL, so the one that you've selected would be lost.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of the problem we always have with client-side routing, client-side. You always have to be kind of aware of that. I think a lot of times single-page apps, we don't always do as well as reflecting the stuff back to the URL. MPAs are kind of geared that way to begin with. So it's funny you have that same ability to kind of do the wrong thing, but it's still a very powerful mechanism. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you want to showcase on this app, or should we kind of switch gears here a bit, and I can pull out a little what I've been working on?
Sure, let's do it. Unless anybody has any other questions, we could talk all day on all sorts of specifics inside the API of and some of the pros and cons, some of what's coming next, some of the challenges we have. But if you're into this, if you wanna get involved, we're very active on GitHub and Discord, and we'd love to come talk to us.
Yeah, no, I think we're gonna look at something a little specific. You mentioned earlier that you figured maybe you're not gonna use Hydrogen for like a generic app, and it's kind of geared for Shopify and all that. But that doesn't really stop me from making a Hackernews demo that maybe isn't that accessible. I'm realizing right now Shopify green against white text is probably terrible, but I made it anyways. I mean, and actually this was a lot of fun because, as everyone knows, I make Hackernews demos in lots of different frameworks. I just pulled up the ones that I have that are from React, and before we kind of look at that too much, I want to actually talk a bit about on the code and what the developer experience was, because this was fun for me because yeah, I mean, right off the bat, I mean, you guys, a lot of people who watch my stream see me do this with Remix before and Next. As I mentioned, there's this app server, but in a sense, I kept the Shopify provider. I don't even know if I need it. I assume I need it for some of the custom hooks, and I use the file routes. But other than that, this is your pretty typical entry point. We just set a suspense, we set our router up, and it was, all I had to do was sneak in my nav, which is fun because I put it outside of the router initially and caused lots of trouble. But now that I have it inside, everything is working nicely. But once you get past this, the nav server component, I made it server. You're going to notice something here. Link at Shopify Hydrogen, and then built with Hydrogen. But if I go over to Remix, it doesn't say server, but link from Remix. Like maybe format document. Yeah, there you go. Sorry. I just copied the component straight over. right? Like that's all it took, right? It was just like I added server because I knew I wanted the server. I probably could have made it a shared component for something like this because literally no one cares. There's no state, there's no anything. This isn't breaking any rules. But I was able to just kind of take the stuff like the layout style components and just copy them over, right? Which again shouldn't be that surprising in a React framework. It's just React. I think the only time I ever got tripped up on this was I didn't realize that Next needed the anchor tags, which they surprisingly fixed exactly a week after my stream, which is cool. But this part was actually pretty straightforward. But if you look like entry server or entry client, where is it? Entry client? Yeah, actually, there's nothing there. Was it root? God, actually, Remix has a lot of other stuff in here. But my point was that you essentially have this root, which is essentially this, right? File routes, outlet, potato. And then, I was able to just kind of copy over some of my stuff. I named it server, but like story component, this stuff, I kept it all the same, and I probably could have, this part is all just React, even though it's server components. And the thing is, the reason I like this Hackernews demo and I use it a lot is because it's an app that is mostly static. It's one that is basically all server components. I made this in Astro using Islands. I made it with Marco as well. And we kind of saw this kind of same pattern because the whole thing is built off the pages, which are basically static. And what I loved about this, although I did actually hit one thing, but the funny thing is it's the exact same thing I hit in Remix, which is fun, is that having a top level catch-all route is actually tricky. I didn't actually figure out how to do it because the problem with the Hackernews demo is slash and top are the same. Like I can do new, obviously, but like slash and top are essentially the same thing. So both a single parameter and everything. I'm basically a star route top level, and I didn't figure it out. It's probably not a big thing, but essentially, this was just a very easy kind of. What I love about this example, and I'll show you here, is some people. I was working with Next, and I worked with Remix, and whether this is called loader or called get server side props, basically the same thing. You kind of set this up and then you do the stuff and then you use some kind of what either it comes in through props or it comes in through the use loader data, and then you get your data and you feed it into your page. I kind of honestly, when I went in and did this took this page and did it in Hydrogen, I just went straight to my component, and then I was like, okay, I am going to get my URL stuff off the request because server components just give me the request right here. Which isn't unlike the loader. But then I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna grab my params from my router, and then fetch API. I'm just calling it right here. There's no async, there's no await. I just call this fetch API. And you might be going, what is this fetch API? Well, it's the same API that I've been moving around in all our examples from solid to Astro to whatever, except I just provided a different fetch. As it turned out, Shopify Hydrogen gave me this fetch sync. And I didn't even bother doing it in the component. I just went straight to my separated out API and just replaced fetch with fetch sync. Like literally this, you can see if I'm going to go back to Remix and pull out this document, it's the same thing. And I just went fetch sync. And then suddenly, as if magic, I was able to just go into my index and just go fetch stories. There is no get server side props, no loader, no nothing. I just have this in the context of it. Of course, I actually built this in JSX instead of TypeScript, maybe because I'm a coward, also because the example was in JSX. So this could have really positive benefits for TypeScript. I just not having to deal with context in the same way, but I wasn't going to chance it. How is TypeScript support, by the way? I forgot to.
That's a good question. So actually, all of the framework itself underneath the hood is built with TypeScript. Initially, the starter template is built in just pure JavaScript, but there's been a lot of requests to move to TypeScript instead. it should be easy to use TypeScript because we're using Vite underneath the hood.
Right.
You should just be able to rename the files and use TypeScript just fine. But the current starter template does not use TypeScript. We probably are going to change that, or at least provide the option to use TypeScript and then strip out the types or something for those that don't know TypeScript. We just don't want to like a high barrier of entry. Like I think sometimes people overestimate how easy TypeScript is for new people getting started. It can be really difficult.
Definitely. And but as you can see, this was a really easy port because I was able to just like take the content and put it in. But after I did the first one, I was like, this is one of the more complicated ones because I'm getting stuff off the URL and the search params, and I'm still just doing the, using some native browser stuff, search params, doing all that stuff. But when I got into other pages, like the specific story page, it was just like really compact. I just got into my story and I was like, okay, get me the params to the route, fetch the data, story, and then let's use it in here. And because I have a suspense wrapping the router, I wasn't even really worried about that. Basically the way the page layout works, it's I don't worry about that. Actually, I probably, if I was going to make it more the same as my other ones, I actually would probably move the suspense boundary around the router and then not around the nav. That's interesting. Is there any reason that Shopify provider needs suspense? Actually, I don't need Shopify provider. I think
you don't need the Shopify provider. The suspense boundary is there for the Shopify provider because it actually does request some details about the.
How about for the router itself?
I don't think it's necessary.
Because what I want to do is this. Because I just have a curiosity here, and my IDE is. But I'm just like, what happens if we do this? Because then, okay, I just said it's Vite, so this is good. Although I don't know if dev mode will give me, like, let's see what it does. Yeah, and of course it's opening stuff on the wrong pay window. Let me just pull that across. All right. Okay, so did that change anything? Yes. Okay, cool. This is what I wanted. I wanted to see the streaming. I mean, we don't need the stream, but because I had the suspense boundary around the whole app, I actually didn't see the streaming before. See, this just doesn't look amazing because the
header's immediate.
But and honestly, I'm not going to make this look amazing either. I mean, I didn't actually do streaming in. Okay, well let's see what I did just to make this more consistent. Okay, let's go file, new window. File, open recent, hydrogen, Astro next, yeah.
So people who are watching kind of understand what happens there because the suspense boundary was moved outside of the top nav. The top nav is immediately streamed to the browser, so it seems instant. And then everything else below the nav is getting loaded slowly. And the reason it's getting loaded slowly is because we're making a network request to actually get the content, an API request.
So I'm just grabbing the suspense from Solid Hackernews demo has suspense on the server and streaming and all the same stuff. So this should be able to just JSX just be a straight port, forwarded. And now if everything worked well, oh yeah, that's that other bug. You said the bug was. Yeah, see, there we go. I mean, this is a silly placeholder. It's not great, but you can see the streaming happen. Basically, this gets sent immediately, and it renders the placeholder, and then when the rest of this content comes in, finishes, it sends it across. So, yeah, there we go. Streaming, very basic usage of it. It'd be nice to have a nicer stylized placeholder, but as everyone knows, all my Hackernews. I mean, it doesn't really matter which one I choose. They all, or actually, I chose the one that doesn't use streaming because this is this is Netlify, not yeah. Let's use edge functions. There you go. Same thing, right? Obviously, right now I'm in dev mode, so it's a little bit slower here on the Hydrogen side. But yeah, cool. Yeah, and actually on a side note, you said that did the issue we find get deployed, or is that still in the deployment?
That has not gotten deployed yet. Like, so it was merged this morning, and it hasn't shipped a new version yet.
Yeah, Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So
Ryan finds all the issues. So we had a text encoding issue that he discovered.
yeah, I mean, I love this example. Everyone knows why I love this example, and it was the example that broke it, because what we're doing here, everyone knows. You go to this page, and we have these recursive comments. But the thing is, we don't want to client render any of this, because then we'd have to serialize all the data. I've gone over this a few times on stream, and I mean, it's too bad I can't do the refresh, because then I could actually see it the way I want to see it.
Maybe try a different one. I know the top one breaks, or actually maybe try it. Let's see if it works. It depends upon the string that's on the page. Okay, yeah, this has a string that's bad.
Yeah, I like
probably found one that might work. Not that one.
Yeah. So yeah, it's okay. We'll get there. I want to show what I'm doing here, and show that this is actually just like what I did with the Marco example, I did with the Astro example, and I did with the Quick example, and they all use islands essentially. And the thing is, everything here on this demo is server, right? So this first page, there's nothing dynamic here, because all we have is the links. So we don't actually need very much here. And actually, I'm not going to use my dev mode version, because I'm going to go back here to my production version. But my point is that that essentially, I mean, we need to. Let's see if I can find it here. Yeah, this is interesting. Do you know what this is? On a side note, it looks like this is the server component information serialized into the page.
Yep.
So, are they client rendered or server rendered? That's interesting.
Huh. Yeah. So like that. So it's essentially that flight request is embedded in the page, and this is necessary to hydrate the application.
Oh, interesting.
And this is stream rendered as well. So these meta flight things will also be streamed into the page.
Right, but that's interesting, because what I was looking for here was what I call solving the double data problem. And I was like, well, if you've already rendered the server components on the server and they don't really hydrate, then like maybe you don't have to send it twice, essentially, right? Because there's obviously the where am I here? Main. There's obviously this, right? Our list of items, and this is everything serialized as HTML. So we're going to send that 100% because we want to see it in the view. And then there's this. It doesn't matter which one you use, right? Like, let's use Remix. Generally speaking, again, we have our main section where we have all our HTML, but then down here somewhere, I'm going to find a script, and it's going to show me all the JSON data, right? So because it needs it to hydrate.
Yeah, so it's not, so the content that you're seeing there isn't the data as much as it's representing the markup.
Right. What I was noticing is some of the resolved fields are in here. Like I can see Nikon for infringing on its video compression. I realize it's more than the data, it's markup, but I see class name, next page. So so the data is intertwined with the markup here.
So those are like, so essentially what this is when you have a server component that passes data to a client component, this is that data that's getting serialized from a server component to a client component. So if you, so does that kind of make sense?
Well, except this page has 0 client components, which is what I'm.
Oh, well, yeah, okay, yeah. So it's the serialization of the props from all of those.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, sorry to put you on the spot. I was just trying to think about this, because I was half expecting not to see this on a page with no client, because like as you said, I would think that you'd need it for any client components, like boundaries for client components. You need to serialize the data, but I wasn't sure that you would need it on like the stuff that's like server rendered? Okay.
Well, there definitely are some client components on the page, whether or not you rendered them or not.
Oh, really?
For example, the link component is a client component.
Oh, right. And the
other ones based out that are just out of box provided by Hydrogen are going to be
right. And I didn't deploy this since I made my change to the thing. Let's actually do that for a second, just because I want to get I think that the change we made to the top level is actually important enough. So let's just quickly do that. Let's go. It's very simple. You just go npm run build, and then it'll do its build. And then I actually Netlify, I think for server functions, you have to, I want to go deploy, but then there's a little fun piece where I have to go prod, but as well, I need to add build, because otherwise the server function won't, the Netlify edge functions require build to actually build it, which is something that doesn't always get documented, but it's something that I noticed because obviously I've been deploying to all the edge providers and playing with this stuff a ton. So
yeah. I think I think it's kind of hard to get away from any client component. I mean, like you need some stuff to execute, like in the client, at least if you don't want a full page navigation. Like if you could have everything as a server component, then it's essentially just server templating. And then every time you click on a link, it's not doing this RSC sort of thing.
Right.
It's actually like doing a full page, multi-page navigation across.
Right. And the thing is, I'm expecting JavaScript, obviously, but one of the things that I thought was interesting, let me see if, oh yeah, I'm in the deployment cycle here. Yeah, okay, so that actually didn't change anything, but now we have our lightning speed loading thing that's probably not even necessarily better, but it shows what I want to show. Yeah, it's just an interesting one, because like this is something that actually I've been debating about a bunch myself, and it's one of those things, and this is just more like a brainy framework author kind of thought, is we actually changed the way our anchor tags worked in Solid to future allow for this, and Svelte, it works this way, where we actually don't need the anchors to be client components, and we delegate them so that we can put the router on the page but not have to go through the client server component prop handoff. And that way suddenly everything below the app entry point basically doesn't need to be client components. So then we don't have to worry about like dealing with all the anchors. Essentially we just delegate. So this is a real anchor, and then clicking on it tells something at the top to do something without actually having to embed a bunch of client components.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, it's yeah. This is just interesting but yeah, it helps me for now know where the state of things are. This, as I said, this is much exploratory for me as anything, to trying to understand how these things are these work. So okay, this is cool, and
that's a good idea, though. I think that's something we could experiment with on our end, like because we own the link component in the framework. We like you said could essentially just purely render HTML out of it and not do any client component, and instead have event delegation attached at the top and just manually do it ourselves.
Like you definitely need JavaScript to make that stuff work, but it's just a question of like all the touch points. Because I mean, the truth of the matter is, regardless of who you're using, this is a React library. Like let's like, this is the reality here. When I load this page here and I am in, like, we load, oh, not bad, 59.5 kilobytes of JavaScript for this page, which means that I believe you are the new React winner. I mean, if there are winners in this, if I go to Remix, we get 62.7 kilobytes of JavaScript. Again, same range. And I believe Next is going to be the biggest. If I double check here, 84 kilobytes. So 50 kilobytes of that is basically React is taken off the shelf right off the beginning, right? I believe that, well, actually it's 40, but I think server components add about 10. So, but essentially Hydrogen is actually, I mean, not that we're 3 kilobytes is not going to make a difference, but the Hydrogen version is the smallest JavaScript payload of any of the React versions that we've that I've tested on stream. So just kind of side thing. But what I'm getting at is you're already going to be bringing this JavaScript no matter what you do, right? So there is that consideration. But
and just as Josh mentions in the comments as well. So Josh is also on the Hydrogen team. You've probably met him. But there's definitely room to optimize that. Like you said, there's this double data thing that was some of the stuff in there. Yeah. And whether or not it's a mistake in you building the app, or it should be easy to do the right thing to optimize the data that's actually sent to the browser, or ideally the lack of data that's getting sent to the browser because it's rendered on the server.
Right. Yeah. The reason I was starting here though was because this is the easy page. This is the page where you have it or you don't, and it's kind of like the litmus test, because essentially in theory we don't need this, but it is not. What I have fun with is this page, because this page is a mean page. And I'll show you how I developed it. In this page, we don't want to send any of this data perceptually, but we are doing some stateful stuff around here, and it's recursive. So you don't get to cheat very easily. And at least on the pattern side, sorry, was this solid? I don't need solid anymore. At least on the pattern side here, I can make my favorite pattern for this, which is server components wrapped with a client component. So if people want to understand what this looks like, if you go to render a comment, we render the comment on the server. So this is part of the server tree. This is all getting rendered as server components on the server tree. And then we get to our funny little toggle component, which is a client component, but you can pass children from a server component into the client component, and these still be server components. So this is another comment component. So this is recursive. So we're actually rendering a whole tree on the server and wrapping each level with a client-side toggle to close and expand it. Mm-hmm. But the actual content under those toggles is always server rendered. And in fact, the way I made the toggle here in our client component is it's just playing with the display of it. So in fact, we never unmount it. So it never needs to go back to the server. On that initial load, we render the whole page and then we client toggle it. And what this means is, you get that benefit from like the hydration story and from the code size story, because we don't need to send, in theory, the data for those comments or the code to render the comments. And this client component is the only client. This is all the code we need, like, to do that. I mean, plus the React overhead, but this is all the code we need to make that page interactive, and the whole rest of it can be done on the server. This is what I love about server components, that you can do clever little things like this, where you can just, this is the old hoist state, like pull it out and use the fact that you can use child conclusion to do this. And the funny thing is, this trick works in all the Islands frameworks. This is the secret, so to speak. And React server components are no different. So that's why when I got the chance to play with Hydrogen, I'm like, finally, I'm going to be able to make this demo in React server components and show it, because it's cool. This is the one where you don't cheat this, right? Like, if your framework doesn't support partial hydration or like React server components, you need to send everything, or you need to like hydrate everything. And this little trick here lets us, like, this is it. You can do this in Marco, you can do this quick, you can do this React server components, which is why I was sort of hoping that I would see the double data elimination, because then I could visually do it, but I didn't get a chance to check.
Well, and the thing is with passing children, like server components as children to a client component, that's supported, but like essentially it's not like HTML. It's actually like data that's kind of going in as that. And then maybe that's a bit of a limitation on React and the way that server components and hydration is built, in that you have to almost double send the data down if it's also sent as children, which kind of is maybe unideal.
Yeah, because my thinking here is, do I use props or anything? Yeah. Oh, it's just props children.
Children. So children is considered a prop that's getting serialized.
Right.
And that's the reason why you can't also with server components like have like render props, like children as functions, because it has to be serializable.
Right. So this is already serialized, which means the benefit. The thing is, like, I would expect some amount of data, because let's face it, when you go in here, you know those M's you were pointing out to me before?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it needs those M's. It needs to know where those nested things. So you definitely have to serialize some amount of data for all the insertion points. But my in our idealized world here, which I think is possible, maybe this is a bit on the React side more than the Shopify side, is I'm picturing a world where, besides knowing that it has to serialize where toggle is, since we're passing no props to toggle and this is already pre-serialized, we don't actually need any of this stuff. That's my
the challenge I think React has is like that still that children is a tree of React stuff. When in at least on the server, it's like it's still a tree that React understands. So the actual tree is still part of that RSC stuff.
Yeah. Is this like a top-down issue? Is this like the fact that React, like, I'm picturing in my head, like, it just goes, like, gets to that point and goes, like, oh, I know this is server, I don't have to do anything, but it's probably more complicated than that.
Yeah, it's not like, it's not actually just dropping HTML in there. That the actual quote unquote HTML is like that inside that RSC response, there was the M's, but there was the J's. The J is actually a tree of of markup, and that is the actual representation. It's not actually sending just like HTML down. And this is kind of maybe like honestly a downside of React to something like Quick, where Quick has enough like attributes and such in the markup itself that it can recreate and understand everything about the tree, whereas React doesn't.
Yeah.
Like React has to have this like proprietary sort of like format of the HTML markup.
Just updating the link that came in through the chat. Yeah, no, and that's interesting because there's trade-offs. Obviously, you can diff it, which makes it nice. But yeah, I mean, I think I showed this on stream a few weeks ago. What was it? It was HN or was it? Yeah, it's yeah, this one. Let's hope it's still up. Yeah, if you don't have that limit, like that thing, like yeah, this is because it just needs to serialize that one comment and do the code for that one thing. This is actually the smallest one I've ever seen. The Marco 6 version of this actually sends down 1.6 kilobytes of JavaScript just for the comment here, and then the serialization looks like this. It has all the entry points, but that's it. That's what all this weird encoded stuff, 99, 106, 123. It's just pinpointing all those entry points.
Well, honestly, I wonder if this is more something that like is because right now we're looking at an experimental version of server components in React land. The 1.0 or like Gen GA sort of release of it is going to be probably different than what we see right now.
Yeah.
But even I imagine there's going to be evolution of this down the road. And I'm wondering if down the road they can somehow be smarter with what is delivered. And hydrating what's already in the browser to not need to have, at least from the server markups, like not needing to duplicate things as much. I'm optimistic that it's possible. But at the same time, like the Quick folks talk about, like, you know, Quick and probably Marco from the ground up were built where the markup is easy to like hydrate and like and interpret without having all of the data duplicated. React really, I don't think was, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. You'd have to talk to Sebastian and other like React folks that have been around a long time, but it doesn't feel like it was built from that ground up with that.
Yeah. And yeah, it definitely makes a difference. Actually, this version, I don't think I have the serialization. Oh, let me see here if this version of Quick has the serialization thing, it's not bad. Yeah. Here we go. Right. Open, comment. Like essentially it's the same thing. They basically they don't need to serialize all the data, just the entry points. So yeah, I think it's a completely different game when you're doing it. This is what I love though, because as you can see here, I've built the same demo in like every framework. I get to compare and contrast. You're just like, quick, okay, here it is. Marco.
Well, and it's kind of the future of the web though that I'm seeing is like the hydration is becoming a big deal. Time to interactivity is a big deal. Not just time to first byte. Like this stuff matters, and I think web frameworks are adapting to it. If React's going to stay relevant, it's going to need to like solve some of these problems better down the road. Yeah. And Helen had an interesting comment too. Like I know you're really trying to like flex the difficulty of hydrating in this double duplication problem.
Yeah.
But with React Server Components Suspense, it becomes really easy to build a user interface where you don't render it all at once, and when you click the little plus icons, those components themselves just suspense stream in the actual content when you actually open it up.
Yeah.
But I know you're not trying to like, that's not what you're trying to show on this. You're trying to show like a friggin' ton of data, and the issue when it comes to the.
Well, and the thing is, this is one of the strengths. I actually think, even with this data and even with the JavaScript side of React, my suspicion is because of this hydration cost, even this early demo will outscore Remix on a page load score. That is my suspicion. And I know I'm being a bit sensationalist here, but I think that already what we're seeing here is the ability to reduce real load costs. Even though this stuff like this might be unfortunate, I don't think this data here might not be necessary, but I don't think it's needed right now. Like I think it's useful for later. It's not like the page loads and suddenly it has to hydrate. I think it's like this is so that for updates in the future, it has what it needs. That's my theory here, at least. So well, I mean,
with regards to Remix, like I don't know, honestly, I
wasn't trying to call out any individual one. I'm talking about just the RSC technology versus the standard client side React.
Well, 100%. I think, and that's the whole point, is if you're rendering more stuff on the server, you should be delivering less JavaScript to the client overall, at least especially for the initial page load. Somebody from Remix or, maybe more other non-server component frameworks can argue, well, in the long term on the application, are you going to be sending more bytes over the wire because every page navigation you have to re-render stuff on the server? Maybe not. It depends on how it's built. It also depends upon how the performance of those server component requests.
Yeah. Now, for those of you who follow my stream, I have a terrible depth test page. I'm not running that right now for two reasons. First of all, I like to at least test it first before putting someone on the spot when they come onto my stream and be like, ah. And the second reason is because the page that's broken is the page that I do the depth test on. So I can't actually do it right now with Hydrogen because of the bug. But if you just take the front page, which is just a nothing page, which basically has no JS and anything, I think this is the first time I've ever seen React at 100. To be fair, so this is maybe setting a low bar, but look at this. Time to interact. Look at this. This looks like Marco or Quick. Like I test them on harder pages. I'm sure from what we saw, it's gonna scale a little bit worse until those other optimizations come in. But from like the simple page, you don't see React with zero hydration cost.
Yeah.
Right. Like regardless of the extra data being sent, like that's not at a critical point where it's going to hurt us. When the page gets larger, yes, it will. But when it's a simple page and it's mostly server and we don't have to hydrate, we're already winning. Yeah, I mean, maybe there's some stuff going on here in time. Well, part of this is streaming, maybe. Yes, we're streaming. So we get the first content. And then the second thing that's different here is, so maybe there's some stuff with the Cloudflare deploy, but the hydration cost is and the blocking time is what I want to emphasize here, right? Look at this, right? This is standard React stuff. It's still a good performing page because it's a nothing page, but this stuff is already making waves or making improvements. Let's just grab next, because it's basically going to be it's the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, there's a lot of things that we still can do. I think there's definitely there's room for improvement that we definitely have.
Next confuses me, and I'm gonna have to look at the timeline. I keep on telling people I do, because Next gets scores similar. Again, it can't get that 100. And if I run Remix enough time, I'll get a 99 as well. Like this like the Remix and Next are interchangeable, but it has a different loading profile that always confuses me, because this makes the hydration look like it's less, but this makes no sense because there's no streaming. Why? How can the first contentful page and the largest contentful page be so different? And my guess is that there's something in Next that triggers the paint early, like I was observing a few weeks back, and there's just something weird going on. I don't know how to explain it. In the end, it doesn't end up making that much of a difference. The total time is in the same range as Remix, but hydrogen.
Nice. Yeah.
Like this is why we're doing this. As I said, maybe there's still places to improve, but this already is showing us. Like, now, to be fair, this is a page that has no client components, which is not a realistic page. We already talked about how in e-commerce you need dynamicism, so this will take a hit. But what I'm just trying to show is that the baseline is this, and the powerful thing about this is that now from this baseline, you add what you need to be dynamic. You're not priced into the whole thing like this. Here, you're always priced into the whole thing. It's all the JavaScript and none of the JavaScript. Static route, not static route. Here, you get that incrementality and a really nice baseline. This is great.
I'll throw out kind of as we're probably wrapping it up soon, but I'll throw out another thing that I haven't heard many people talk about. This might be more islands-ish architecture, sort of pro of something like server components, but like when you work at a company like Shopify, like I previously I worked at Salesforce, worked at a number of big companies. A lot of times you'll build platforms where you want to embed third-party things inside a page, like third-party plugins, extensions, apps, etc. Kind of the cool thing about a server component is a component is still like a composable thing that you can easily render in some markup on a page. But what's cool about it is it has this concept of server and client stuff that can be inside of it. So you can package up, imagine like a Shopify sort of app store where you could install a third-party app or component or sort of island sort of thing, drop it on the page. When I say drop it on the page, it could even be drag and drop to some sort of WYSIWYG editor, or you just, put it inside your components and you render it somewhere. That's now like this sort of self-contained sort of island that can have server functionality, fetching something on the server, rendering stuff on the server, and rendering stuff in the client.
Right. So which is very cool, because what you're saying is it can still hit your endpoint, because
or even a third-party endpoint.
Yeah,
it can do all sorts of stuff.
Right, because the server portion of it is just an API, and that was funny. That when I first saw server components, I'm like, okay, so React found a new way of writing APIs. It's like GraphQL 2.0 or something like that. That was what I was thinking. But then I realized that the island thing was more similar to, like, I was seeing that it was actually a hydration solving thing, and I started understanding that better. But what you're saying is it's packageable because
it's just a component. Like, so yeah. Sure, if it's not a component, like you can come up with all sorts of weird APIs to maybe do, like, I don't know, make a GraphQL request or a third-party request and then render this other client component that some third party provides. Right. This is like wrapping it up potentially all in one.
Yeah, only piece that wouldn't be easy to wrap up is if there's you don't get the, I mean, and this is the same with client components and stuff today. You don't get the SSR story necessarily, right? Like,
well, it could still SSR. So like, again, like you just have this server component. Like, so if I'm a third party, if I'm a person that's building apps for Shopify,
okay,
I build a server component, and this server component renders also client components that
right.
I own. And now when you embed this inside your Shopify store, it's going to render that server component. Also, it's going to server side render the client components inside it as well. Unless I, as the developer, say I don't want it to be server side rendered, and I put some sort of like
right, but
server
I'm
check.
assuming that this, because it's part of, I feel like there needs to be some specific backend piece here, like they need to be part of this, what Shopify is doing or something, right? Because this ability to do this server rendering that we talked about was something that you guys added. That wasn't something that was, what you're saying is the Shopify ecosystem can share this very easily.
Well, yeah, I'm saying, so what we've added for server rendering applies to any component. Like any client component that you bring inside your Hydrogen app is going to be server-side rendered by default automatically.
Yeah.
Unless you specifically write some sort of code to say you don't want it to be server-side rendered, it's going to happen. So that's where I say a third-party sort of server component that you're putting inside your page, if it's also rendering client components, already automatically they're going to get server rendered as well.
Right. No, I follow you. Sorry, I was thinking like the opposite way. Like that makes sense. We're bringing into this, the platform with Hydrogen and Shopify handles this already, and you can bring anything in, and it's portable, and it's a really nice story. I was like thinking about like the opposite way, where it's like if I wrote something with a server component, client component, and then I like took it somewhere else that wasn't, but
yeah.
Like that's a different story. It's the capability of the platform. But yeah, no, I understand what you're getting at, and that's a really cool story. I think, especially for Hydrogen as the framework, because it gives you the same kind of modularity and composability and like kind of like sub ecosystem, so to speak, where people can build with this all in mind and essentially create a really rich capabilities of components and plugins and whatnot on top of this platform, and they'll all kind of just slot in really nicely.
Yep. Yeah, like you could have this little Hackernews sort of component you embed into my Shopify storefront, and your server component reaches out to your Hackernews API and does all sorts of stuff on the server, and then it eventually renders some client components. Like I, as the consumer of your component, would have no idea, or I wouldn't even necessarily need to know what APIs it's calling underneath the hood on the server.
Yeah. No. This is really cool, and I can see building towards that future. Yeah. I had a lot of fun just playing with this anyways, because like getting rid of the separate loader, like you kind of have this dream when you build that you can just like fetch your data and just use it, and you don't have to worry about async. And I showed you the code here. Like when I was playing with this for the first time, I was just like, oh, like, do I care that this is async? Like I'm just writing my experience. It is interesting that with something like the RFC for Next, we still have get server side props and stuff, and it makes sense because that's how you parallelize stuff. Nested routing kind of brings that back, so we have this kind of push and pull. That actually is kind of interesting from my perspective, because to be fair, I wonder if it is like I said it. I forget who I was talking to. I think, oh yeah, Theo. I was talking to him, and I was like, you don't get all of it. Like essentially, if you want this, if you want this co-location, you're going to get waterfalls when you nest, unless you use a compiler. Is what I was getting at, because like there's this kind of weird dance that you don't get nesting, but parallelized fetching, or you don't get co-location, or you have waterfall, or you need to use a compiler. And me as a framework author, I'm always trying to play with this tension. I mean, not 100%, but I'm just saying a lot of times the views are nested, which will trigger those waterfalls, right?
Yeah, and that's an interesting area we've tried to sort of think about. So like if this index page is rendering another component that has a fetch API inside of it, what you're saying is like the index one needs to run, It's going to wait for that to finish, and then eventually the nested sort of one's going to run, and then that needs to finish. That's the waterfall.
Right.
What we kind of solved, at least for hydrogen, like is yes, you can either compile up front, like you said, or Remix solves that by saying we'll pull everything to the top and as a top loader.
Exactly.
We've kind of solved it with an idea of we control this fetch API, or this sort of querying this data. We provide you with a helper API to do it. So when a route loads, we know eventually once the route finishes loading, we know all of the sort of requests that went into rendering that route after it loads. So if we can maintain inside the framework a cache where the key essentially is the route, where the route is given this route, I know that these 3 requests need to happen. So immediately when we have the route loading at the framework level, we can initially kick off immediately those 3 requests. And even though in the code there's a waterfall there as far as they're defined, we can immediately start the request going.
I see.
It's a caching sort of thing where you have to like,
it's every time after, essentially. Yeah. So like the first time you get the waterfall and then it learns. Yeah, that's interesting. That is a different tack to it. But I said it is something definitely on our minds when designing this thing, as I said, because I was playing with this myself, or these kind of ideas myself, and Nikhil from the Solid Start team, who's building our meta framework, he's pretty proud of himself. He's like showed me, he's like, he pulled the stuff into the component and then used a compiler to hoist it back out like Remix loaders. So he like, you write it like Hydrogen, but it's actually doing Remix style loaders in the background. And I was like, man, this is so cool, but I think we might need to pause on that for a moment and think about this, because I think it's like confusing, because people might not understand what's happening.
Well, and there's edge cases.
This is the world. Yeah, if this is the world that people live in, though, maybe this starts feeling natural, because you just kind of go, oh, yeah, of course, it's a server component. You can just fetch right here, and then people just like, if we get to a world where people aren't thinking about those kind of details, maybe this is a future. But this is the first time I got to actually do that, and it just worked in such a long time.
Well, it honestly, part of me is like, am I just a jaded software developer that's been around so long that this feels weird to me? And if somebody new coming into the field, like, and they're learning this for the first time, would this make so much more sense? They'd be like, oh yeah, of course, I just fetch it and it comes here. Like, I don't know. Part of me is like, this is weird. I feel uncomfortable with this, because it's like, what's really going on? And I think it's the same thing with server components versus client components. Like, we have debates on our team, like, this is confusing. It's confusing to us sometimes, where we're like going back and forth on this paradigm. And part of me is like, well, is it because I've got baggage? Like, if somebody new, I like coming out of a boot camp or right out of school, if you throw them into this, like, is it going to be more intuitive? Honestly, I don't know. And I'd love to meet up and talk with some more junior software developers and really get their feedback on this. Because a lot of the people we work with are very senior, have framework experience, have been around for a long time. But I'm really also curious to know. I want to get the feedback from people who really are new, who really are just learning web development, and get their response to these paradigms.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's funny how much that mind shift things, and even like semi-generational, in the sense that like 4 years or 5 years in a JavaScript framework land is like it's like a full generation has happened. Like, it's like the boomers or whatever. Because like it's a funny thing, because I'm this makes me incredibly old school, because like even other related topics, I didn't get into it because I wanted to skip it for time and things, but like the two-way binding conversation that I brought up during the beginning of the stream, there's a but like it was in fashion, and then went out of fashion because people were having real pain with it. And anyone who lived through 2012 web dev in the front end, when React came and like got rid of it, everyone was just like, oh my god, this is I never want to go back there again. They have like war scars and stuff. Like, it was just, two-way binding was so terrible, like unimaginably so. and then it kind of starts popping up again. And then I have talked to new developers who are like, yeah, my first framework svelte. I picked it up because it looked really easy. And they're not worried about what's going on under the hood or whatever. They just go, yeah, I let variable. And then I got this two-way binding thing. And they're like, what's wrong with two-way binding? And I'm like, oh, if you only knew. But they just, maybe they never hit that. Svelte solves it in a slightly different way that maybe doesn't make it as painful. And, times have changed. But you try and convince someone who worked with, highly reactive frameworks with two-way binding, it's just it's like battle scars. So maybe the next gen who picks up this stuff will just kind of be like, oh yeah, like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, well, honestly, that's why I like the JavaScript ecosystem. Is it's always felt a little wild west, and the change is rapid, but then it makes it fun. I think it makes it exciting. You get to be part of these sort of these framework decisions. These there's so much changing. Like 4 years from now, 1 year from now, who knows what the ecosystem is going to be like, and it's going to be fun to be a part of it and see how it changes. And that's why I like it. I know some people hate that, but I think it's fun.
It is definitely the best part. And honestly, that's a perfect note for us to end our show today, because that's what positive for the future. I'm very excited where hydrogen's going. I'm very excited where the web is going. Thank you, Bret, so much for coming on and talking to us about these things. I think this is so awesome. Is there any one thing else you want to give a shout out to? Any links or any
I just give the main page for hydrogen that I shared at the beginning. Maybe we'll share that out. Also GitHub, if you've got questions or you want to get involved, we're excited to have people involved in the community. Come chat with us on Discord, etc. Thank you, Ryan, as well. It's really fun to chat with you. I love your positive attitude on all this stuff too. You're not I don't know. It's great to chat with you.
Yeah, no, it's so much fun. I learned something. I love learning stuff, and to be able to talk to people working on these problems and kind of seeing that, it just influenced my whole mindset and gets me excited for the future, which is the thing that drives me. I now work at Netlify, so I get to work on my stuff and do it. But when I was doing late nights and I had to remind myself, why I'm doing this and stuff, it was talking to individuals like yourself who are working on great things and keeping me excited, that kept me going. So I'm super stoked to have you on, and thanks everyone for coming to chat, asking questions. And I will be doing another stream next week. I'm not 100% sure what it's on, but we'll see you all next Friday. All right.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah. See ya.